All right. Well, welcome to your second cup of coffee. We thought we'd just keep going with this conversation. There's a bit more that both of us are intrigued by, some other ideas surrounding this 52 days,
Right.
construction, etc. So we're going to go with episode 3 of Conversations Over Coffee with Jonathan Wilson and keep going. So for our second cup of coffee, I don't exactly have a did you know, but I thought I would spice it up with actually putting our coffees in mugs
Right.
that I brought that are near and dear to me because it's the stuff that has stories attached to it that I get excited about. And so you're drinking out of a mug by a local coffee shop right by our studio in downtown Santa Ana that I go to probably at least once a day, if not more. But fantastic people, fantastic coffees. And then my mug is actually from Seattle.
Wow.
This is from my favorite coffee shop in Seattle. The fun little logo of a boy running with an airplane. It's kind of just a cool one. And I think there's probably a science behind this because you can dig deep into anything. But
Right.
it's interesting. That's a low, wide mug. This one actually is a tall. It's thinner. It's almost like a wine glass, like the thinness to it.
Good for tea.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm using it for the wrong beverage.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what do you got for me?
Okay, well, my trivia question to you is to ask you a question about which country in the world drinks more coffee per capita than any other nation.
I feel like I'm on the spot when you ask these. Yeah, you throw these questions at me a lot, and because I love coffee so much, I'm supposed to know
you
so
should
much,
know.
but I don't. So I don't know what it is because I would guess it's. I mean, the easiest would be like we're so inundated, so I'd say, and the U.S. is so big, so I'd say, well, it's got to be the U.S.
All right, well, per capita, you are way off because the U.S. is number 26 in the world per capita.
Per capita, I didn't pay attention.
Australia is 42.
Wow.
The UK is 45th. But the country that drinks more coffee per capita than any other country in the world is Finland.
Wow.
Number 2 is Norway. Number 3 is Iceland. Number 4 is Denmark. And number 5 is the Netherlands. So obviously those cold countries that have long, dark winters or very long days in summer, I don't know whether that's got anything to do with the amount of coffee that they drink, but they are the countries that consume more coffee per capita than any other country in the world.
That's really interesting. So the follow-up, which I don't know the answer to, would be to know if they can they even grow coffee in that part of the world? Okay, so it's all imported. Okay, there you go.
Next time my trivia question. Well, I'm not going to give it to you because you may look it up. So I have another trivia question for you next time.
All right. Well, let's transition. We've been talking about, we focused a lot in our first part of our talk about the structures, being intentional with the structures in our life and rebuilding those structures in our life, and the value of that, the importance of that, some of the kind of byproducts along the way. But I want to go a little deeper with you because we've also thrown out the idea over the last couple of weeks in passing of the ideas behind deconstruction.
Right.
Because there's we're focusing on the positive, we're focusing on the structures and the construction of things. But if I circle back to the very beginning of the last part of our discussion of the idea of being able to assess the damage, when you're assessing the damage like Nehemiah did, that obviously meant that there was some kind of a deconstruction that happened. And so I want to jump into that. I think it would be interesting just to get, when we mention deconstruction, what are the first things that I got lots of things swirling in my head, but I want to find out what are at the forefront of your mind when you think deconstructive or deconstructivism in our culture. What are the things that you think of?
Well, I think in relation to what we're talking about, 52 days, the deconstruction of the city of Jerusalem was that it was literally destroyed
Okay.
by the enemy. And so while God is all about building, the enemy is all about destroying. I'm speaking about our spiritual enemy, Satan, the devil. And it's interesting to me that when Jesus talked about what he would build in Matthew, Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And when Peter said, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God," Jesus said, "Flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. You're Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." So within the first same kind of section of that comment or that declaration, Jesus is talking about he's going to build the church, and he's talking about the gates of hell, which is all of the authority of the enemy will not be able to withstand what he's going to build. Mm-hmm. Well, the enemy's purpose is to destroy, to deconstruct what God is constructing. And so I think when I think about deconstruction, I think very much along those lines, which is on a higher level, is that all the time while we're building, Jesus is building his church, the enemy's trying to tear it down, to deconstruct it. While we're building our own lives, the enemy's trying to tear down those walls. In 52 days, I'm trying to establish some disciplines, 5 things, 5 foundational stones, but my flesh is warring against my spirit because I don't want to go on a diet. I might not want to exercise. Uh-huh. I might not want to spend 15 minutes in prayer. My flesh just goes, no, I'd rather watch Netflix or whatever. So there's that war that's, I'm trying to, build my life, but there's this tension that we're always facing. So I think about it on that level. But I know there's multiple levels because in the last 18 months, there's been a lot that's been deconstructed, and there's a lot of forces at work trying to dismantle structures that have been established for centuries, millenniums.
Yeah.
It's a big subject. And I know, for example, the whole idea of deconstructionism, if that's the right word, is something that you're familiar with in the architectural world. And I'm fascinated, and, we had a little bit of a discussion about this when you said, that's something I studied.
Yeah.
So I think it would be interesting to hear about that. I've talked about this from a spiritual.
Yeah.
You're talking about architecturally. And then, of course, there's a lot that's happening in our culture. Mm-hmm. We're in a culture now that is questioning things that have been accepted for a long time.
Yep.
And is deconstructing everything.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting because this is an architectural principle. And we're talking about building.
It's a very fun topic. We could just do a whole series on this. No, I don't think that'd be exciting for everybody. But one of the things that I've been diving into personally is looking back at. It's caused me to look back at my architectural education and spending a lot of time studying architects that would now be put into the category of deconstructivism. Right. And you always put people in categories after the fact. It's not like as these architects were practicing, they give themselves a label and that's how they practice. But it caused me to look at why was I studying that? Why was I attracted to it? I grew up skateboarding. I was a little bit in a culture of like wanting to disrupt the norm, which could be associated with deconstructing things. And so I think I was naturally drawn to that kind of architecture as I was studying. And so I'm looking at all these different things, and I got 1D in my entire education. Like we're talking like kindergarten all the way through getting my Bachelor of Architecture. 1D.
Wow, you obviously didn't go through a COVID season.
But that came from one of my design studios when I was studying back on the East Coast in Virginia, in Washington, D.C. And it's funny to look back on that because what I was trying to do design-wise, it was very along the lines of deconstructivism, where things just like on a very face value, like you deconstruct and it gets a little interesting. But I was deconstructing in a way that was then the result was just focused on the aesthetic, which is a pretty surface level idea.
Yeah.
And I think my professors all saw that, and that's why I got a D, because it was so bad.
Right.
But it just threw me for a loop. I had never received any kind of a grade like that in my entire life, and knocked me out. Like when you get a D, that knocks you out of like being the summa cum laude, and all those. And like, anyways, that goes down another rabbit hole. But so I looked at that, and then what I mentioned to you, which has been interesting as a level of introspection, is since then, I have actually been, without me always knowing it, reconstructing my design ethos or my design principles. And it's been hit and miss through the years in a sense of like exploring different things and trying to reconstruct what does it mean to design? What does it mean to be an architect? How am I going about my craft? But that then has led me to some ideas that we've had fun with of intentionally deconstructing or deconstructing happening to you. And either way, what do you do with that? And I think because it's my profession, I needed to be intentional about figuring that out, and I still am figuring it out.
Right.
But that's then led to what are other areas of my life that either I blew up on my own, I deconstructed it, or that happened to me.
Right.
And is deconstruct? This goes. My ideas are swirling on this, but can deconstruction be a positive thing when there's intentionality behind it to construct?
Yeah. Well, it's to me, it's very interesting because I think anything that is deconstructed must be for the purpose of reconstructing something is better and something that is more effective. Mm-hmm. And I think very often deconstruction can be constructive or it can be destructive.
Yeah.
And I think, culturally, there's a lot that's happening that is destructive from my perspective, because you think about the absolutes that have been a part that basically the Judeo-Christian ethic is established on. Though when the form of it, the method, we always say, the method may change, but the message should never change. Mm-hmm. So the method, we're meeting in a warehouse, now.
Yeah.
People used to meet in cathedrals. Mm-hmm. Does that make any difference to God? No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Where the methods change, but the message is the same. On the walls of our foyer in our church, we have the Apostles' Creed, which has been proclaimed and declared in churches for over 1,000 years, probably more, back to the first centuries that the Nicene and Apostles' Creed were established. I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. That is something that the enemy is wanting to deconstruct or dilute and kind of deconstruct the absolutes upon which our faith and the Judeo-Christian ethic and the fabric of our culture is being slowly dismantled. So to me, that deconstruction is negative. But then there are positive aspects of deconstruction, I think, in architecture. And, in a moment, I'd like to jump back to your thoughts on that. But there was a more creative expression of that.
Yeah.
I think about Barcelona, which is a city that I've had a fair bit to do with over the years. Even as a boy, we used to holiday near there. My mother was Spanish and have friends in Barcelona, used to go there. I can remember going to the Picasso Museum as a teenager in Barcelona.
Wow.
And I saw these hand-drawn pencil drawings of Picasso when he was 8 years old. And I thought, there is no way that an 8-year-old could draw something as brilliant as that drawing. And then you look at Picasso's later work, and he there are some of his works that you think, well, a child could have done that. They could have just, splashed some paint on a canvas and said, there's my creative genius. But he kind of deconstructed what was accepted and created a new genre of art.
Yeah.
And I think, in a sense, Barcelona's a little bit like that. It's a bit of a different kind of a city, because you think of Miro and some of those other artists and Gaudi, who obviously his most famous work is the Sagrada Familia, but that beautiful cathedral, but so many different things that he did. And it was almost like architecturally deconstructing what was established and what was, well, you have to build this way, you have to do things this way, but maybe deconstructing that in order to reconstruct something that is creative and new. I think that's a positive thing.
Yeah. Rather
than the negative that we're seeing so much of that is destructive.
Yeah. Well, it's really easy. I think of the visual. It's really easy to just take a grenade and toss it into something, put a grenade in a clay pot, and just the clay pot blows up into millions of pieces. And then just for that to be that.
Right.
And that, to me, that's a picture, that's a vision of, like, there's no real intentionality to create, to rebuild something better or recreate something. That's just intended to destroy or dismantle completely.
Yeah.
And I go back to, and I'll assess, like, I go architectural designs, like, that the ones that didn't work or that I would critique the most would be the ones that that never really established that direction of recreation. If something's gonna be dismantled, deconstructed, the only time that really has value is when the focus has a reconstructive nature about it.
Yeah.
Because again, for me, it's the best picture. Going back to Nehemiah again, why did he assess? Because he's going to recreate.
Yeah, exactly. Well, here's a thought. Let me ask you. You're an architect. And architects and engineers have to work together. So if you are deconstructing accepted architectural principles that you learned in college, you're coming up with something totally new that visually is going to be an expression of something new.
Yeah.
You still have to abide by basic engineering principles, or the building's going to fall down.
Yeah. We haven't figured out how to make things float yet.
Yeah, things don't float. You can't defy gravity. You can't defy the normal, principles
Yeah.
of engineering and architecture.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, when you look at what's happening in our culture, is that there are all sorts of new ideas, and there are all sorts of new thoughts and expressions and things that are being said. But if you defy the basic principles of life, it's not going to stand. It's like Jesus said: you build a house on the sand. When the winds come and the rains fall, it's going to fall, because engineering-wise, it's not built on a solid foundation.
Well, and again, I don't. I'll go back. That's why I got a D in my design class, fourth year, first semester, a D. I mean, in the design studio, that's like the only class that any architectural student cares about. All the others don't matter. You got to do good in that one, and I got a D. I think they were just trying to be nice to the Californian and not fail him. But I think that they recognize, and I now see, is at that current time, the project I was working on, I just was blowing up the foundations, the design principles that I should be working with, but I was kind of doing it just recklessly. I was just kind of anti, or I was just wanting to be different, and so I was just blowing it up. And instead of having the intention of hey, I'm gonna take these principles, I'm gonna build on them, blow up maybe some ideas, but I'm gonna recreate those ideas still based on these foundations that the architecture profession has been grounded on for millennium. So that for me is critical. And as I've been I'm always on this journey of architectural education and figuring things out. I have come to more and more. I appreciate in our own design work, but also in the design work of other architects, the ones that I can see and experience the foundations of our profession, but the advancements that they've made. Right? We've always been able to cantilever something, but as the best engineers continue to figure things out, we can cantilever things further and further.
Right.
And that's I have a good friend, that's his favorite word. He always tries to fit in the word cantilever in a conversation with me.
Explain it to us, because
cantilever is something it's like something hanging off an edge.
Okay, yeah.
So it's but it's that idea of hey, there's some basic design principles there, but we're advancing them. And to get there, you may have to deconstruct a few ideas, but it's not throwing them all out.
Right.
It's not just we're chucking them all out the door and we're starting over, or we're not even going to worry about it. It's how do we figure it out and go further, go better. And that's what, for me, we've touched on a few things of culturally right now of happening. The things that hurt that I see in our culture is when people just want to beat something down, have it be erased from history, without any building or creating coming out of it. And that's what sometimes I get caught up in that, and I'll get I want to okay, what are we building from there? Because we should always be learning. We should always be assessing the damage that has occurred.
Yeah, anything that is challenged, anything that is questioned, has to be all about building a better future. History, we can't change history.
Yep.
It happened.
Yeah.
But what we can change is the future by what we learn from history. That's why history is so important. Winston Churchill said, if we don't study history, we're doomed to repeat its failures. So let's not eradicate let's not eradicate our history. Let's remember and learn from it. And I think for me, the I think about Jesus. I come back to Jesus because as followers of Christ, Jesus is the center
Yeah.
of everything that we do. And he, in a sense, if you look at it, you could say, well, Jesus deconstructed it. He changed everything.
Yeah.
He changed when he challenged a culture, the Judaism, and the religiosity of that, and the fact that it had become crusty and brittle and legalistic, and he introduced the New Testament, to which the people were extremely resistant. And so when Jesus was talking, he was talking to multiple people. Every conversation Jesus had, he had people who had multiple different agendas. And it seems like today when we talk, we're in the same position.
Agendas.
Whatever we say, we're surrounded by people with multiple agendas.
Oh, man.
And if you don't agree with them, then you're either cancelled or opposed or pigeonholed or considered irrelevant.
Yeah.
So this is how Jesus approached it, and I think this is for us as followers of Christ is what we need to do. Jesus never engaged people at the level of their agenda. He always elevated the conversation. So he brought the conversation to a point where, when it came to hatred, he talked about loving your enemies. He elevated the conversation.
Yeah.
He was surrounded by people who hated the Jews, who hated the Romans rather, who hated those that were occupying their land. He always elevated the conversation, and I think that's the key for us. Is in the environment which we're in, and when there are so many different agendas, is we've got to elevate the conversation.
Yep.
And love your enemies. Jesus was asked, about taxes. He was asked about many different questions of what ought to be done, and he never gave a straight answer. He always elevated the conversation, which was the ultimate answer.
Yeah. All right. Well, because we're always trying to be intentional, we're always trying to be a little bit organic with this discussion.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect way for us to end this episode. I think this is a fun topic, and I think we obviously are going to carry this discussion on further because we're enjoying it. But again, just as a reminder of behind why are you and I sitting down and having these conversations is we really want to promote conversations with others, and we want to have further conversations with people in our world. But we're hoping that for those of you listening, there's been a few ideas maybe that Jonathan and I have been talking about that hopefully spark conversations while you're at the coffee shop, while you're at the supermarket, while you're just talking to your coworker, that could take conversations in new directions, expand your world, and have some fun with it. That's what I'm thinking. So thanks for joining us, Jonathan. Anything to end with here?
I hope that's
awesome.
Yeah.
Till the next coffee.
Until the next coffee, yeah.